So I think we've heard about a little bit of the history. We've heard a bit about the vision in being worked on in San Francisco. We want to turn to somebody who's been working to turn some of this into reality in Montgomery County, Maryland, Zachary Marks, who's been leading this effort and with seed funding, I believe from a $500 million bond measure to help create the seeds of a new social housing model. And want to hear from you around efforts that you are doing as one of the first places that is really investing in doing something different as a social housing model. Take it away, Zachary, and good to meet you.
Good to meet you too.
I see you in the Zoom world. I know some of the others on the panel have already, but
I'm a regular Hollywood Squares participant, so it's I appreciate that introduction. So so my presentation is definitely going to be much more of the plumbing. So I apologize, it's not. It really is sort of my day job, which is just focused around getting as many units on the ground as possible. So just to sort of correct the record, to the initial housing production fund was a $50 million construction equity fund. That's important because construction equity is typically about 20% of the capital stack, and it's usually the most expensive to get, and it usually comes from private entities. So all things that certainly work against the kinds of values and outcomes that we're all talking about here today. So a $50 million fund would support 200 million of development, just to give you a sort of an order of magnitude. But it was extremely helpful for HSC. So HSC actually has for decades been sort of not on purpose, I guess, but just has been sort of delivering social housing. We just didn't really call it that. So long before I got there, we've been delivering mixed income housing where there's an affordable component. It's either majority owned or entirely owned by HSC, and we use those assets to produce value to do more stuff. And so this fund was really created because the council came to us and asked us, how can you do more of what you're doing? And so we said, we sort of came up with this tool. And some of the values of this tool are that what effectively happens is the council has approved 3.1 million in annual appropriated funds to support the principal and interest payments on a 20-year bond to create the $50 million fund. HSC actually issued the bonds, so the county is really only, not only, we're grateful, but is really just supporting the $3 million per year. And after 20 years, the bond is paid off, and the fund actually continues to revolve at no cost to anyone. So that's sort of another positive, really sort of feature to this fund. And so it's for the construction period. So it's the period of construction and lease up. And so after which it gets paid back through the permanent financing of the development, which means it can revolve about every 4 or 5 years if there's about 2 or 3 years for construction, 2 or 3 years for lease up. And it's providing committed capital to HSC's pipeline, which means we can more confidently go after more deals because we know we have capital ready to go, as opposed to perhaps tempering our pursuits because we might not know what the financing markets look like at the time. One of the most important features here is that it acts as equity for HSC. So what it's doing is it's actually it's putting HSC in the position of Goldman Sachs. Instead of having to go get big LP investors to do these really large deals, HSC is that instead. And so that means that's where the controlling ownership that's where controlling ownership comes from for us. And that's important because that's the way most of the rest of our portfolio is, really probably 99% of it. And these are larger transactions. So the average LIHTC new construction deal in the county is about 125 units. And it's usually, around 100% affordable nature of the program. And so this tool is for a specific kind of mixed income deal where we're doing usually 300 to 500 units And so the component of that is delivering about 100 MPDUs per transaction, just an average. And so effectively, the reason we created this was because we wanted to create a tool that could work alongside all the other tools without cannibalizing those other tools. So increasing production, getting over the biggest limit to things, which was the fact that we have all these finite resources that everybody's using, maxing out, and you really can't do much more unless you have a new tool that doesn't use those things. And so this tool is really designed to solve all those technical limits that make it harder for us to produce at a higher level. And absent those limits, we're able to increase our pipeline to a greater extent, which means more ownership, more assets, more future transactions. It's scalable too. So we're actually headed to council again for a second 50 million. And so the council's been so pleased at how it's worked that they're already ready to fire it up again a year later. So I'll just whip through some slides just for food for thought here, but just to give you a sense of how quick it was able to happen. The legislation passed in March of 21. HOC issued the bonds to populate the fund 5 months later. And the first project loan for this guy up here, if you can see my cursor, the west side of Shady Grove, was issued 4 months after that. And then the second transaction that'll be funded by the first 50 million. And then that first 50 million is sort of spoken for the next 4 or 5 years. It's going to happen at the end of this year. And again, HSC's had a history of doing significant, sophisticated new construction. And our stuff's all over the place. This is the Lindley, and this was actually precisely the kind of mixed income model that would, the HPF would have been great if we had it at the time for this. We would have captured more value for the public space. But we also do stuff that's, highly subsidized where we can get the subsidy. Some of the, so this is the Fenton Silver Springs of replacement rad deal that we own 100%. So this one's, I think 70% affordable, subsidized. And that's downtown Silver Spring. This one's about two-thirds affordable. That's in downtown Rockville. And then this is under construction to open, and this is about 45% affordable, including, this is actually replacement public housing for the building that was next door that's about 50 years old. And so HSC has this history of doing this stuff. And so this is really just about creating another tool to help us do more of it. And so I know that I wanted to tailor some of this to this particular group. This tool doesn't act alone. I think most folks that are in affordable housing development know that you very rarely use one program. This is not the easy peasy world of conventional real estate where you go get a loan and then you go get equity and then, you have a closing dinner. Like, it's just not that way in the affordable space. But I wanted to at least give a sense of what the HPF is able to do, independent of some of the other resources that you can layer on here. Although this is probably somewhat old hat for y'all on the West Coast, but this, Hillendale Gateway is actually 2 buildings. And so these will be the first passive house buildings in Maryland, multifamily buildings in Maryland, and the first net zero multifamily building in like the mid-Atlantic. So for us, valedictorian of summer school and all, but for the East Coast, that's a really big deal. And so it's just an example of how it's not just about getting units on the ground. It's then about heaping on top of that other values, other mission outcomes. And, we were able to create much more of that European style of social housing stratas where you really do have affordability up and down the spine. So as I think most folks know, tax credit deals have in the past typically sort of hit around the 60% AMI level. There are certainly exceptions to that in the more recent, recent history, but you tend to see like market or, this sort of like 60% and then nothing. And so we really are trying to deliver buildings where really anybody can live there. There's no subsidy here. So that's both a strength and weakness of this transaction. Again, we're trying to do these deals in ways that don't necessarily, that are operating in the desert, where we don't expect necessarily the federal government to step up. We don't necessarily expect the state to step up. But if they did, we'd layer it on here in a heartbeat and it would be even better. So a lot of what we're trying to do here is to get units on the ground where we're able to improve upon just the base affordability of the HPF we do. But again, it's designed to really operate in an environment where perhaps there isn't a ton of extra help coming from other places other than the county itself. And just to give you, so these slides, I keep putting them in PowerPoints and nobody cares, but I'm going to keep doing it. So, because I actually think these are the most incendiary slides, and I normally don't explain the joke, but here we are. So, there's this Council of Governments goal. It's basically just in the DMV. It's it's production, housing production goals that Northern Virginia, DC, Maryland have set for themselves. And as I'm sure you're shocked to hear, we immediately started failing. So, but what the top left graph is really showing you is that we're already missing in the first 2 years, already missing the 3,300 units a year we're supposed to be delivering in Montgomery County. What's cool about what's happening with HOC is that mapping both actuals and projected pipeline, we're actually showing up in the 3,300 needed units. And so one of the things I was trying to convey to the council is that you can actually go get market share. You can actually show up. You're not a blip on the radar. So like this is, so this, I'm colorblind, so I'm sorry. Whatever color the bottom is here, maybe it's blue. That's mapping out the $50 million, the first HPF. Orange, red, best guess. This is the second 50 million that if they approve, it shows this is mapped on 3,300 units a year. And again, this, whatever your crazy numbers are in San Francisco where everything's more expensive and bigger and everything, like just, it's all this is just pro rata. It's the same idea. So, but that the idea that the silly old housing authority could go grab market share like this with frankly pretty inexpensive financing is pretty neat in my mind. And to show what we did, we at the time, it was the middle of COVID, and so what we emphasized was trying to develop a program for the county that was as cheap as possible, basically. And so effectively what happens is they have their annual principal and interest payment. And this is actually, this 4.1 million is what it costs today. We just priced this. So it would cost them 4.1 million now to do 50 more million because interest rates have gone up. But these projects, we've committed to paying 5% back to the county as which is very inexpensive for private equity replacement. But we do 5% per project, which for $50 million is 2.5 million. And so the net cost of the county on an annual basis is about 1.6 million for a $50 million fund that revolves and in 20 years is free. So that's pretty good. But one of the things I want to emphasize is that you don't have to do it that way. So there are other ways of broadening and deepening affordability here. So as an example, this is the 2.5 million we pay, our projects pay back to the county to offset their principal and interest. If, for instance, you wanted to instead say, don't pay us back, reduce 50% units, which are embedded, which are a requirement of the HPF, reduce them to 30. That would cost about $7,300 per unit per year. And so that would support 343 units at 30% AMI. And this is just thought experiment stuff, but it's just it's an example of even within the HPF, before you start layering programs on it, you can use it to hit deeper affordabilities. And as you saw with the Hillendale Gateway deal, we were able to hit deeper affordabilities. Another way to do it is to actually spin off LIHTC phases. So this is a development we're working on in Wheaton, and there are 2 HPF phases, and then there's a LIHTC phase. What's great about this is this LIHTC phase becomes far more feasible because of the zoning it's in, but also because these buildings are chewing up a lot more of the sort of fixed cost of the deal. And so they're actually creating an opportunity to do a sort of a stub is the wrong word because we love all our children, but this allows us to do a LIHTC deal here where you have 100% of a smaller building, so you're getting 110 units. On the others, you're doing 30% affordable, and my commission hasn't decided what it's going to be. It could be more, but again, you're getting kind of the same output from all 3 phases, but you're creating. So in terms of like, how do I get land? This is a great way to go buy a big piece of property and kick out 3 deals. And they don't have to be HPF. They can be LIHTC. They can be, sort of other places. And probably one of the most straightforward ways to use the HPF would be in concert with rental assistance. Vouchers, rental assistance are generally the most efficient way to deliver affordable housing, is to just straight up give people the money they need. So, what's great about, this is the Hillendale Gateway model, or affordability again. And so FMR kind of goes right here, and it shows you all these units would become totally affordable to a voucher holder. So, it's, combining HPF with vouchers, this sort of financing with vouchers is, I think would be highly effective. And then lastly, more of the long game, some of the reason HOC is able to do what it's doing is because it's been doing it for decades. And so, this city block here, these are 2 new buildings. This is actually the 267 unit building you saw before. And there's $20 million in this deal from HOC because we paid the mortgage off on this building right here over the course of 30 years. That building is exactly the same sort of building where it's majority market rate. This one actually has 40% affordable in it. It's a 311 unit building. And so that's another really powerful tool down the road for authorities that start doing this, is that in the future, you do build equity as you pay off your mortgages, and it really does provide yet another tool. So these mixed income deals, this cross subsidization isn't just about subsidizing affordable units within the same building today, but it's actually about building equity for the public, the public organization to do more mission down the road. So I will stop my share. Thanks for the opportunity to speak.